What was she like to work with?
Oh, you know, when we first met, before we did the pilot, I said, she was 12 years younger than I. And I said, Carl, she's awfully young. And she had this kind of mid-Atlantic accent, like a Katharine Hepburn. She had never done comedy.
He's one of the most beloved stars in TV history. Charming, hilarious, and full of joy. But at 99, Dick Van Dyke is finally sharing the truths he's kept silent for decades. Behind the laughter were hidden tensions, heartbreaks, and regrets. From creative betrayals to emotional wounds, he opens up about 6 people who left lasting scars. Some surprising, one devastating, and one himself. This isn't gossip. It's a rare, honest look at the painful moments behind a legendary career. The truth may be hard to hear, but it's unforgettable. Number 6, Walt Disney.
When I met Walt, we hit it right off. We both admitted that we just pretended to be grown up and that we were still kids.
Walt Disney gave Dick Van Dyke the role that would catapult him into global fame. Mary Poppins wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural milestone, and Van Dyke, as the cheerful chimney sweep Bert, danced and smiled his way into cinematic history. But behind the whimsy was an experience that left Van Dyke with a quiet scar. Dick didn't just land the part, he fought for it. He even paid out of pocket for a screen test to play the second role, Mr. Dawes Sr., removing his false teeth and transforming himself to prove he could do more than sing and smile. That passion impressed Walt Disney enough to say yes. But it came with a caveat. Van Dyke would be on his own. The biggest wound? That infamous Cockney accent. For decades, it's been a running joke. What the public never knew was this. He wasn't given a proper dialect coach. The one assigned to him? Irish. And no better at the accent than Dick himself. No one stepped in. Not Walt, not the director, no one corrected him. So when the ridicule came, mocked by critics, impersonated by comedians, Dick took every blow. Alone. What made it worse? He worked on that film for free. That's right, he never accepted payment for playing Bert. He believed in the movie that much. And Walt Disney? He never defended him, not once. Dick would later describe Disney as a genius, a man who believed in me. But underneath those words was the quiet realization. Belief isn't protection, and silence can be betrayal. Keep your emotions steady because this next chapter isn't about betrayal, but forbidden love. Number 5, Mary Tyler Moore. On screen, Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore looked like the perfect pair. Flawless timing, infectious chemistry, and an effortless warmth that made audiences believe every scene.
She, within no time at all, became as good a comedian as I've ever worked with. She was just sensational.
But off-screen, the truth was far more complicated. Dick later admitted what many fans suspected. He had real feelings for Mary, ones he never acted on. She was 24 when the Dick Van Dyke Show began, 12 years younger than Dick. At first, he wasn't sure she was right for the role, telling Carl Reiner she seemed too young to play his wife. But once the cameras rolled, their connection was undeniable. What followed was a subtle, years-long tension. They were constantly together, rehearsing, filming, promoting. And though nothing physical ever happened, Dick said the emotional strain was real. Loving someone in silence, especially while trying to maintain a professional image, took a toll. He described it as a quiet hunger that followed him home every night. As Mary's star rose and she became the show's breakout favorite, Dick never showed envy, but he couldn't ignore how the attention shifted. Scripts favored her. The press wanted her. He remained proud, but the distance between admiration and longing grew wider. Mary later joked, "The amazing thing is we never had an affair. I always thought it was a terrible waste." Dick echoed that sentiment. For all the laughs they shared, there was an ache underneath, a missed connection that was never quite resolved. He never blamed her. He never acted on his feelings. But even decades later, he couldn't fully forgive himself for falling in love with someone he was never meant to have. And for Dick, that quiet ache lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Number 4. Rose Marie. Before the Dick Van Dyke Show became a hit, Rose Marie thought she knew her role. A seasoned comedy veteran from vaudeville and radio, she believed she'd be the female lead. Mary Tyler Moore, at the time, was a relative unknown. But as the show took off, everything changed, and not in her favor. Audiences fell in love with Mary's character, Laura Petrie. The writers responded by giving her more screen time and storylines. Meanwhile, Rose Marie's character, Sally Rogers, the witty, sharp-tongued comedy writer, slowly faded into the background. The punchlines she was known for became fewer, the scripts shorter. Rose Marie didn't hide her frustration. She went straight to creator Carl Reiner, only to be met with a now infamous line. "You both have great legs. They just prefer to look at hers." Meant as a joke, it stung deeply. Rose wasn't looking for flattery. She was fighting for the spotlight she'd earned through talent, not appearance. Dick Van Dyke was caught in the middle. He respected Rose deeply. Her comedic instincts were unmatched. But he also understood the show's shift. Mary had struck a cultural chord. The set became quietly divided. One woman rising, one being edged out. Though Rose never let her feelings affect her performance, the warmth between her and Dick faded. They had started the show as friends. By the end, the camaraderie was strained, replaced by a quiet resentment. For Dick, it was one of the saddest parts of the show's success. He never forgot how the spotlight pushed someone he admired into the shadows. Sometimes, friendships don't end with betrayal. They just get left behind when the story changes. If you thought creative control issues were tough, wait until you see what happens when the spotlight gets stolen. Subtopic 3. Carl Reiner. Carl Reiner didn't just boost Dick Van Dyke's career, he launched it. When CBS passed on Reiner starring in The Dick Van Dyke Show, he boldly cast Dick instead. That decision changed television history.
The Dick Van Dyke Show was, the two stars of the Dick Van Dyke Show had not had other big careers yet. Every other television situation comedy that you can think of were big stars from the movie medium or from radio, or mainly from movies, who had already had careers.
Reiner's writing and vision gave the show its heartbeat. Dick, still new to the spotlight, was grateful, but it quickly became clear. This was Carl's show. Van Dyke was the lead actor, but Reiner pulled every creative string. Even minor suggestions had to pass through him. Dick often felt like a guest in someone else's creative space. As the series soared, so did Dick's frustrations. He longed for input, for freedom. That chance came in the 1970s with the new Dick Van Dyke Show. This time, Dick hoped to explore more daring, modern topics. Reiner returned to write. But when CBS pulled a controversial episode Carl had penned, Reiner walked off. No fight, no warning. The show quickly lost its energy. Without Carl, the creative spark vanished. It was a painful turning point. Dick and Carl stayed friendly, but something was broken. Number 2, himself. Of all the people Dick Van Dyke struggled with, the hardest was himself. To the world, he was the cheerful, dancing optimist, but behind the scenes, he was unraveling. The 1960s brought him fame, and with it, crushing pressure. To keep up appearances, Dick began drinking. First socially, then secretly, until it became a full-blown addiction.
And of course, by the time I realized I was in trouble, I was too deluded, like most alcoholics are, to be able to understand what was wrong with me.
In 1972, he checked himself into rehab. A brave step, but not the end. His marriage to Margie Willett had already eroded. She hated Hollywood. He couldn't leave it. At the same time, he began an affair with Michelle Triola, which grew into a long-term relationship. But the guilt never left. I felt like a fraud. Everyone loved the man on screen, but I didn't love the man I was. Even in love, shame followed. He never fully forgave himself. Fame didn't ruin Van Dyke. It split him. There was the man the world adored, and the one he kept hidden. In later years, he spoke openly about his regrets, turning pain into purpose. Through honesty, he helped others heal. His greatest battle wasn't with a co-star or executive. It was the quiet war inside, the version of himself that nearly slipped away. Just when you thought the darkest chapter had been told, along comes the silent betrayal that shaped everything after. Number 1. Phil Erickson. Before becoming a TV legend, Dick Van Dyke was one half of Eric and Van, the Merry Mutes, a silent comedy act that lip-synced old records and mimed hilarious stories. It was strange, original, and electric. His partner, Phil Erickson, was a seasoned mime who saw potential in the young DJ back in 1947. That partnership launched Dick's career. They performed tirelessly, sometimes up to 7 shows a night. In 1950, they broke records with 35 shows in a single week. By 1951, they had their own TV show. A year later, they appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show and were poised for national success. Then, without warning, Phil quit showbiz entirely. No argument, no explanation, just gone. Dick was blindsided. He's never spoken harshly about Erickson, but the pain is obvious when he mentions him. This wasn't just a career setback, it was personal. Erickson had believed in him when no one else did. That quiet departure left a lasting scar and taught Dick a painful truth. Even the deepest creative bonds can disappear, and trust can vanish without a word. Thanks for watching. If you found this look behind the scenes as eye-opening as we did, don't forget to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. And don't go anywhere. Click the video on your screen now to watch the next deep dive we know you'll love.